Depression affects more than 150 million people worldwide, making it a leading cause of losing healthy years of life as a result of disability. In fact, by 2020, depression may be the second leading cause of healthy years of life lost, second only to heart disease. Why is depression so common? Well, it is said nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. But why would we evolve to get depressed? Depression poses a baffling evolutionary puzzle, if it has such negative effects, but yet it remains so common and heritable, meaning a big chunk of risk is passed through our genes. So there must be some kind of adaptive benefit. Otherwise, presumably, it would have been naturally selected against. Maybe depression is an evolutionary strategy for defense against infection. Infection has been the leading cause of mortality throughout human history. The average life expectancy was 25, and it was not uncommon for half our kids to die. With such stark capabilities, infection has been a critical and potent driving force in natural selection. When we become infected, there's a surge of inflammation as our body mounts a counterattack. And then what happens? We feel lousy. We feel sick, we get weak, tired, slow, and sleepy. We don't want to see anyone, we don't want to do anything. All we want to do is sleep. It's like we're depressed. And that's great for fighting infection. Not only does it help us conserve energy so we can put up a good fight, but reduces social contact. We're not running around infecting everyone. It's the same reason we evolved to think poop doesn't smell good, or decaying flesh. That keeps us safe from infection. In fact, we see this phenomenon with other social animals like honeybees and mole rats, who feel impelled to crawl off and die alone when they get sick, which reduces the risk for the rest of the community. The relationship between mental health and inflammation was first noted in 1887, for which the only psychiatrist ever win the award got a Nobel Prize. But what evidence have we accumulated in the centuries since that inflammation causes depression? Well, people who are depressed have raised inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein. Inflammatory illnesses are associated with greater rates of major depression. Indeed, that's what's found in a variety of inflammatory conditions, including more kind of benign inflammatory conditions like asthma and allergies. And that's important, suggesting the mood symptoms are not simply feeling bad about having a terrible disease, but may be directly tied to the inflammation. And most powerfully, you can actually induce depression by inducing inflammation. Like when we give interferon for certain cancers or chronic infections, up to 50% go on to suffer major depression. Even just giving a vaccine can cause enough inflammation to trigger depressive symptoms. Taken together, these studies are strongly suggestive of inflammation being a causative factor of mood symptoms. So, can an anti-inflammatory diet help prevent depression? We didn't know until about 43,000 women without depression were followed, along with their diets, for about a dozen years to see who became depressed. And it was those who ate a more inflammatory diet pattern, characterized by more soda, refined grains, and meat, suggesting that chronic inflammation may underlie the association between diet and depression. Normally, we think of omega-3s as anti-inflammatory, but they found fish to be pro-inflammatory, associated with increased C-reactive protein levels, consistent with recent findings that omega-3s don't seem to help with either depression or inflammation. The most anti-inflammatory diet is plant-based, which can cut C-reactive protein levels by 30% within 2 weeks, perhaps because of the anti-inflammatory properties of antioxidants. I've talked about this before, but never really explained why antioxidants are anti-inflammatory. See, oxidative damage caused by free radicals may cause an autoimmune response in the body by changing the chemical structure of otherwise ubiquitous molecules to generate new structures that the body attacks as foreign. For example, when LDL cholesterol gets oxidized, our body creates antibodies against it and attacks it. And so clinical depression can be accompanied by increased oxidative stress and the autoimmune inflammatory response it creates. Free radicals lead to autoimmune inflammation. Where else does inflammation come from in our diet? Endotoxins. Right? It's worth reviewing how the endotoxins in animal products can cause a burst of inflammation within hours of consumption. What does it do to our mood? If you inject endotoxin into people, within a few hours, inflammation shoots up, and so does feelings of depression, as well as feelings of social disconnection between people. Although previous research has demonstrated that inflammatory activity contributes to depressive symptoms, no work in humans has examined the effect of experimentally induced inflammation on anhedonia, the lack of reaction to pleasurable stimuli. This is an important symptom of depression. No work has been done, that is, until now. Within hours of endotoxin hitting their bloodstream, these experimental subjects not only started to feel depressed, but they had significant reductions in activity in the reward center of their brain. They were less excited about winning money playing video games, for example, in this study. But by eliminating animal products and eating antioxidant-rich diets, we may be able to prevent or treat depression.
Welcome, folks. Dr. Charles Parker. I'm here to tell you about one of the most important clinical problems that we see almost every day in my outpatient offices, and we've been seeing them since the early 90s, and we've been talking about it for many, many years. And it's this following problem regarding misdiagnosis and mistreatment of comorbid attention deficit disorder and depression. So I call it the basal ganglion seesaw. If a person has depression and ADD at the same time, and one of those halves is missed, it makes the whole problem much worse. And the person feels completely untreatable, like a treatment failure. You know, if you feel like you're a treatment failure, you've been treated and treated and treated for depression, but it's not getting better, it could be that you have a significant attention deficit disorder problem associated with it. So how does the seesaw work? Well, it's really simple. On this side of the equation, the seesaw is a balance, like a regular seesaw, and you got attention deficit disorder on this side and depression on this side. Okay, so attention deficit disorder has, people have a problem with dopamine deficiency. I'm oversimplifying it, but let's just call it a relative dopamine deficiency, and we're going to treat that dopamine deficiency with a dopaminergic medication, something that's going to affect the dopamine function on that side of the equation. And a person who has depression, many forms of depression, predominantly serotonergically related. So you're going to use a serotonin medication for depression. Now, if you miss one of those halves, here's what happens. So assume that a person has both problems going on, but one half of it's not recognized. So what happens is a smart pediatrician comes in and sees this child with attention deficit disorder, treats the dopamine side of the equation and pulls that dopamine up appropriately. What happens to the serotonin? It actually goes down. Well, what happens when serotonin, which is already compromised, goes down? Well, the child feels like they're completely depressed. They crash very hard in the afternoon, vigorously. And what happens then, the individual, most of the time the physician will try to change the dopamine product repeatedly and miss this side of the equation. Pediatricians are not trained on the depression side. Some of them are not trained on the attention deficit disorder side, but that's how the oversight occurs. Now, if you take the other side of the equation, what happens frequently with adult psychiatrists, not all of them, and this is not all pediatricians, but this is what happens. An individual who sees only part of it, say an adult psychiatrist sees only the depression, they get the serotonin correct, but they aren't really trained to recognize attention deficit problems. In fact, many of them just don't believe in attention deficit disorder, which is a whole other thing. So what happens is you get the serotonin treated, you get the dopamine come down. What happens when a person loses their executive function? You tell me. Bipolar illness. Yeah, it's not bipolar. It is half of the diagnosis is missed. You can't treat a serotonergically related problem, a depression, with a dopamine, nor can you treat a dopamine problem with serotonin. Serotonin doesn't treat a dopamine problem. Dopamine doesn't treat a serotonin problem. So you have to treat both of the problems simultaneously. It's just like if you came in and you had heart disease, and I were a physician, I said, listen, I know you got heart disease, but I'm going to try and treat it with insulin. I'm going to give you some diabetic medication, and I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that it works for a heart disease. I don't think so. So what happens is we have two different disease states, really, for want of a better expression. One of them is dopaminergically related, one of them is serotonergically related, and we have to treat each one simultaneously, carefully, with very clear ideas of what we're doing on both sides of the equation. Very simple, very quick. Think about this. Don't treat depression with a stimulant. Don't treat ADD with a serotonergic antidepressant. It will not work. The person will get worse, and they will very likely be called, you guessed it, bipolar illness, and get a big dose of Depakote, which they don't deserve. So thanks for your attention. Talk to you later. Have a good one.